I would just like to start asking you, asking the two of you, what impact do you think these kind of reforms that are far away, you talked a little bit about it, that are far away in a tiny little country, even smaller than Norway, could it have any impact on the Norwegian debate? And also, they connected to that, what's actually Norway's position in these global forums where we participate and where we have a formal position, but I also heard different things from different people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The two of you.
Well, I would say that, as I suppose we talked about, the United States started the war on drugs in 1971, and they started even before that. So the fact that the United States go ahead here, changing the marijuana policy, that's extremely important, I think. Uruguay is also interesting, but that's kind of more curious, strange country, very far away from us.
We don't have the way that the US have.
No. But of course, people look towards the enormous costs of drugs in Latin America. We know these figures from Mexico that you described. We know them. So I think these changes have a very large impact, and not least, I think among, let me say, conservative politicians who often look to the United States, who are in favor of the United States, and think that what's happening there is very important for us. And the way they changed the cannabis policy, I think, makes quite a lot of people question what's going on here. So I think these changes are extremely important, not least when they happen in the United States.
Yeah, I think the US change is one of the reasons that is so important is because the US has been it has shaped the global, it has policed, so that when countries in Latin America have said that they want to have chewing coca leaves legal, they've sort of stomped down on it. That's more difficult now as Latin America has had a lot of economic growth, but at the same time, now that America is itself, the US is itself changing and legalizing it internally. I think Uruguay is very important as an example that there is a different way you could go than the commercialized free market advertisement, price competition model that they've chosen in Colorado and Washington, which I think you touched upon in your talk. And then finally, as to Norway's position in this, I think it's different people in Norway, different politicians will have different views, but Astrid Nøklebye, who is from the Conservative Party, and who has been talking in these preparatory talks for the next UN special session on drugs, she said that the important thing was that she said, there's so many different things here that are important, but we can't, we have to focus on the really big things, and one of the really big things is the massive problems that this has caused in the supplier countries in Latin America, the deaths, the corruption, and the crime. And she said that, so I was surprised by that, but I thought it was very positive that this kind of perspective is now also presented from Norway's official point of view.
Just let me supplement that. I think that Partiet Høyre, the Conservative Party in Norway, they have this link to Minerva, which is a kind of think tank, and Civita, where you have lots of ideas about these things that's quite easily transported into the government. So I think that's, in a way, in some way it's easier to frame this as also a question of freedom and things like that. That's often done in that context than in the Labour Party, which it's much more centered on harm reduction and welfare initiatives for those who have really problems. And I agree with Ole's description that harm reduction has become very important in the European and Canadian and Norwegian context, but my point is that that doesn't really apply so very well to marijuana. So you have to use other arguments there, and therefore I think that this link here between parts of the people who are advisors for the Conservative government, they have these links to another discourse that's basically developed by Civita and Minerva. I think one of the very important things that you presented was the difference between legalization and regulation. And of course, that's very nice music for people in Norway, because we have this very strong tradition of regulation of the alcohol market and also the tobacco market. So we have what's called the monopoly, this is the monopoly for liquor and also wine, and that's actually quite heavily under attack these days from our right-wing government, at least one of the coalition partners there. And if you look at the discourse in the United States, you see that, for instance, this chief attorney in Seattle, he frames it like legalization and taxation, but no regulation. So you have this, I think, this very important voice. I don't know if you saw that. Robin Room, this very central researcher in this area, tried to compare these three regimes in addiction, which is the main journal here. With, well, he gave your solution the best credit, I'd say, because you have this will to regulate and have all these measures. And this course in the United States is not very much about that. And at the contrary, you see that very heavy capital interests are positioning themselves for this market, which is, of course, going to be extremely huge in the United States. They are not allowed in yet, but I think the discourse to prevent that is not very well developed in the United States. So that means that Uruguay has a very important voice here, I think.
Thank you. And we'll open the floor, please.
What are the differences between the regulation in Colorado and Washington? Because I believe there are some differences there.
Yeah.
Small.
I know that there's, well, at least the way it's presented is that Colorado is more liberal. One of the things that is the difference is that in Washington state you will not be allowed to do home cultivation. So you have to buy it from a dispensary, and there are some differences in the level of taxes and so on that they will have. But I think it's fair to say that Colorado has been more liberal. The number of shops that opened was very, very large there. The number of shops opening in Washington state was very much smaller, and they spent a longer time developing the regulations. How big the difference will be in practice is difficult to say.
Okay. I think there is a different tradition here, because I think in the United States there would be like 13 or 15 states which have regulation on liquor. They have kind of state-organized liquor stores, but only a minority. And Actually, I think that Washington State used to have that kind of arrangement before they closed it down a few years ago. But I think that they have more tradition in regulating liquor. So that probably will, well, echo some of these possibilities they have here.
They had a lot of medical marijuana laws now implemented, and researchers have been trying to find out sort of does that increase use and so on. And then there was a researcher from the US called Rosalie Pakula who was visiting Norway last year or the year before that, and she said that you have to look at the details. And she said that the things that she claims to find is that if they allow home growing, or if they allow dispensaries that compete against each other, that's when you see a larger increase in use. So I think, and that would be the home growing. It's just very, very cheap, and that you will allow in Uruguay. But the commercial shops competing against each other to get customers and to develop gummy bears and so on, that you will not have because they go for state monopoly.
Thank you. Please.
I just wanted to say that there is no comparison between legalizing and regulating. And in the United States, of course, they regulate because they need restrictions like age limits and so, but they are learning because they are not good at it in the beginning. So they made this pink chocolate, and then they got to get it back because it was too strong cannabis oils. And then the wrapping is good for children, so they have to have new wrappings. So they are learning all the time how to regulate. And Norway is in front of regulating these kind of things with our state's monopolies. So we should go in front and legalize at once.
Thank you. Please.
If I may first, a major difference between Colorado and Washington is that Colorado had the medicinal regulation beforehand, and Washington did not. So Colorado basically just made them into recreational pot sales, and Washington make a whole different. My question is concerning the connection between cannabis and heroin. Because I heard what you said, Mr. Pedersen, about Hansen, who didn't want to be called Hash Hansen, but he did want to be called Heroin Hansen. I'm wondering about the strong discipline that comes with hash laws. It seems to be around the fact that hash is very corruptive of the kids, and I think it might be connected to the stairwell theory, that you start off with hashish and then you end up with stronger substances such as heroin. So I'm wondering if in Norway, if we consider hash to be a gateway drug and we get the heroin debate or legalization, will this influence the view on cannabis and the debate on cannabis?
I think that when he was quite proud of being nicknamed Heroin Hansen, I think it had to do with the fact that opiate addicts died from overdoses. They were visibly seen at the Plata in Oslo. So everybody understood that this is very, groups struggling with large psychosocial problems, and that they die, and that it's very difficult to get rid of these habits, and that the treatment system hasn't really taken very well care of them. So that applies in a way to heroin use, and actually it doesn't apply that easily to amphetamine users, for instance. When I'm doing lots of research in prisons, and we see in prisons that heroin users are also regarded as much more seriously ill, and not least those who are in opiate maintenance programs. And they also sometimes have a lower position in the system within the prison, because they are sort of, the amphetamine addict is kind of masculine, he's a rough guy and things like that, and people who are on heroin, they're quite often, they have another image. So the point is that it's also quite difficult to sort of frame amphetamine use within this same category. And cannabis is very far from that. I mean, cannabis users, they're not dying from cannabis. No one are dying from cannabis. They're possibly sometimes now treated in the treatment system, but usually not because they want to be treated. They have to do that in a way. So it's a very different discourse, and obviously he would feel the metaphor sound very strange. Hash Hansen, that probably indicate that he was in favor of cannabis or something like that, so he wanted to legalize it. So it's very different. Huh?
He was named as Sausage Hansen.
Yeah, first he was that. So it was an improvement in a way. So I think that's the main reason, and that's also why the harm reduction framework is not very easily used with regard to cannabis, and probably not in Uruguay as well, because the ordinary cannabis user, medical marijuana user, he's not probably regarded as sick treatment needing or something like that in Uruguay. No.
Yeah, this is not a kind of leakage, but according to in regard to Mr. Hansen, I think why he preferred to be called heroin Hansen and not cannabis Hansen, it is because they are differently regulated. Not necessarily, but heroin is a legal drug. There was no problem. You can introduce heroin as a medicine without violating any kind of treaties or conventions. Legalizing cannabis would include to violate the treaties, as they have done according to most people, I guess, in Uruguay. And I think that is what often stops the discussion, because very few other nations than Uruguay, according to my knowledge, would like to violate the conventions, which is they cannot legalize it. Uruguay has done it. They has had some hard work from Mr. Jørgen and from the INDC, as the International Narcotic the board, Mr. yes. So even Portugal, I guess, they are not pro-legalizing it. So that is what, to my opinion, to the discussion about legalizing, in a way it leads the discussion